Indeed, what is art but storytelling? This is a question, I feel, that seems simple once said, but reveals itself to have some depth to it once investigated. First, it's important to understand exactly what is meant by art. I think the first thing that pops into people's heads is something like a Renaissance or Baroque painting, but nowadays we can obviously see art has a much wider definition than that through various contemporary mediums. Painting, like that of the Renaissance, of course falls into the fine art section of art, as does something like sculpture or illustration even. But as stated, art can mean so much more. Film, music, writing, video games, design, and yes, everything encompassed in fine art is art. And ultimately, all of these are a culmination of some form of storytelling. Starting with film, this seems the most obvious. It very much sets the standard for a narrative structure. There's the classic 3-act structure, seen translated to popular films, which is essentially the same as the short story structure that we're all taught in school that can be vaguely applied to almost any traditional film. Every now and then, of course, you get a film that flips the expectations around, something akin to Christopher Nolan's Memento. Even then, though, the plot follows the 3-act structure. Some other examples are films that can act as companion pieces to each other, something like Her and Lost in Translation are my favorite example, and other films can now be part of an entire cinematic universe, telling much larger, overarching stories, as well as the one found in the singular film itself. Music is naturally one of the oldest forms of storytelling. In a contemporary sense, we see perhaps the most straightforward form of storytelling in music on Broadway, whereby they are literally conveying the story of the play through song. However, of course, popular music outside of plays tells stories as well. The lovely thing about music is the depth of levels within the storytelling. Similar to that of a film in a cinematic universe, the song has its own self-contained story and also has a puzzle piece that lies within the larger album or mixtape. Going off that, one can go one level more by comparing an artist's album to their entire discography, which generally will tell the story of the artist's transformation themselves. Once again, akin to the cinematic universe, other artists can make cameos in tracks that are not of their creation and contribute to that story as well as their own. Writing, it goes without saying, comes in many forms of storytelling. Fiction allows readers to get encompassed in stories with endless amounts of imagination. Nonfiction informs readers of true events using traditional plot devices and arcs in the vein of normal fiction. Poetry is probably the most unique of the set and falls within its own complexities, from using rhyme schemes to free verse to haikus. The list goes on. And of course, this is without going into the genres contained within, as writing can be the foundation upon which other mediums build on. Video games are one of the most interesting examples due to the direct interactive element with the player. Most notably, there are games that share many aspects of plot and story with film structure. Some instances being the Walking Dead series, God of War, Spider-Man, Red Dead Redemption 2, and basically anything from Naughty Dog. These are all great showcases of a narratively focused title, but certainly there are games that are also slightly more unconventional. Rocket League, Ultimate Chicken Horse, Duck Game. It's hard to see how these fit into the storytelling narrative. However, these games display the beauty that video games bring to the narrative table. Just by being interactive and giving the player a sandbox to play in, they allow players to create their own self-contained narratives and stories. They'll always remember the time they scored the last-minute game-winning aerial in Rocket League, or maybe they'll always remember the time when they made the level completely impossible to finish by adding hockey pucks in Ultimate Chicken Horse. Such is the attraction of video games, as they can combine both linear narratives with choice-driven sandboxes. Design is perhaps an outlier here, as today we very much see it as a vessel to sell things. Designers are hired by advertising studios, who are in turn hired by large and small corporations to advertise their products to make money. Intentions aside, note, there are of course great designers and studios with great intentions as well. Design is an incredibly nuanced form of storytelling. Where film has over an hour to communicate its themes and points to the audience, design usually has seconds. Sometimes this can be seconds to communicate a plot of a film, as seen on a film poster. It could be seconds to communicate that one can only turn right in this lane. It could be seconds to communicate how to go home on your phone screen. At the core of it, design is communicating something, and ultimately it tries to tell us a story, whether that story is, hey, buy our product, or hey, help end social and racial injustice and bias. Art, of course, acts in a similar sense to design, but rather asks the audience for a bit more time. It is not constrained to rules and to time limits when it calls itself art, and in doing so, it inherently tells its audience it has a theme or a thesis, acting as a juxtaposition to design which can be considered subconscious storytelling. Painting in this regard can be analogous with the previous comparison of music, with each painting being a song that belongs to an artist's period, which belongs to an artist's overall history. And each one of these is different. For example, there would be a painter like Gustave Courbet, who is committed to showing the true nature of life in stark contrast to the romanticism that came before him. And then there will be someone like Piet Mondrian, who pioneered the style and the idea of ubiquitous beauty and appeal. Each artist, painting, and historical movement telling a different story. Looking at these mediums altogether in this lens very much brings their similarities to light. They all follow a similar structure, they all tell stories. In this analysis, we see something similar to The 7 Basic Plots by Christopher Booker. In the book, he basically discusses how all stories stem from the same core plot points, and that in reality there are, well, 7 unique stories. Whether you believe this analysis to be true or not, it brings up an interesting idea. Have we really not come up with any new stories? Let's look at it this way. If this were true, that essentially all stories are the same 7 stories, then what's the point? How can we still be entertained by them after all this time and repetition? Take Damien Chazelle's La La Land for example. This is a story about a couple who are chasing their dreams and falling in love. Fairly straightforward story summary. Why then is this film unique? Well, it's a new contemporary take on musicals and film that pays homage to the days of old Hollywood. It uses color to represent character and feeling. It takes advantage of its cinematography to heighten the story and enhance the world the characters live in. It explains character emotions in an over-the-top but nevertheless enchanting way, etc., etc. So essentially, when asking what story is being told, one should really be asking, how is the story being told? And this is the key to art, and in turn, storytelling. How? Each medium is inherently unique in this way, and therefore tells its own stories that, while might be the same as other mediums, hold distinctive values that are specific to itself, even when it's done poorly. Film uses many techniques of storytelling that are isolated to the medium. As previously mentioned, cinematography, color, music. Not only this, but films use editing, visual effects, and the like to further their story. Music uses its lack of visuals to its advantage by using its inherent structure, rhythm, lyrics, and tone to tell stories that, while might be the same, in different ways. Writing uses prose and structure, the ability to be omniscient, and allowing readers to imagine the environments and characters. Video games, as stated, use the sandbox to create unique personal narratives crafted by the player, but they also utilize the fact the player controls the protagonist to invoke emotions, whether that be happiness, anger, hatred, or compassion. Design and art use their own self-contained mediums and even amounts of interactivity to tell everything from personal stories to stories of the world at large. So what can we surmise from all of this? That we really like stories? Yes. No matter what happens in the future, stories will always be told. Art will always be made. It's rooted in everything we do. Even if the idea that all stories are the same is true, it doesn't matter. Mediums evolve with the stories that are being told, and as time goes on we see, every now and then, one of these pieces of art evoke our emotions, make us think about the world and ourselves, and tell us just how creative we can be.